Episode 41, Far West About to Explode. Welcome to the Hidden and Distorted History of the Church series, where we will be looking at the historical aspects of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormons. In this series, I will try and inform those unaware of the true facts of Mormon history. Last week, we exposed the accusations of counterfeiting against Oliver Cowdery and other former church members. We delved into the rise of the Danites and Sidney Rigdon's incendiary Salt Sermon, a speech that poured gasoline on already smoldering tensions, setting Mormons and Missourians on a collision course that erupted into the 1838 Mormon War. This week, we pull back the curtain on Joseph Smith's explicit endorsement of the Danites' aggressive tactics as chaos explodes in Gallatin. We uncover Smith's first polyandrous marriage, adding a layer of personal controversy amid the brewing storm. And finally, we witness Smith rally his Danites, preparing for a conflict that would thrust the Saints into open war with their neighbors. This is the untold story of ambition, betrayal, and a community hurtling toward its breaking point. Part 1. Joseph endures violence once more. The summer of 1838 in Missouri was a pressure cooker for Joseph Smith and his followers, teetering on the edge of chaos. Tensions with locals were escalating rapidly, and Mormon leadership was under fire from both internal dissenters and external threats. In the midst of this turmoil, Joseph Smith's journal entry on July 27, 1838, pulled back the curtain on the secretive and militant organization known as the Danites. He wrote that they were formed, according to Revelation, to put right that which is not right, and to cleanse the church of very great evils which hitherto existed among us. Personal Writings of Joseph Smith, ed. Dean C. Jesse, p. 262. If this entry doesn't scream divine justification for violent enforcement, what does? But this explosive revelation didn't make it into the sanitized history of the church. Why? Because directly linking the Danites to Joseph Smith and framing their actions as divinely sanctioned was a PR nightmare the church couldn't afford to let stand. The entry was crossed out, deliberately omitted, and with it, a raw glimpse into the militant underbelly of early Mormonism was buried. Yet the purpose of the Danites couldn't be erased as easily. Historian Leonard J. Arrington describes them as a group devoted to defending Mormon interests, enforcing discipline, and intimidating opponents, both internal and external. The Mormon Experience, p. 96. Their existence was less about spiritual governance and more about brute force, carrying out Smith's vision of Zion through loyalty and coercion. Smith wasn't just leading a religious movement. He was mobilizing an enforcement squad to root out dissent and dominate the frontier. The so-called cleansing of the church wasn't spiritual renewal. It was about eliminating threats to his leadership, whatever the cost. As Stephen C. Leswar bluntly states, the Danites were essentially an extra-legal enforcement group, acting with the implicit or explicit approval of Mormon leadership to carry out their objectives. The 1838 Mormon War in Missouri, p. 54. Let's be clear, this wasn't a benevolent act of religious unity. This was Joseph Smith gearing up for war, both against dissent within his flock and against external enemies who dared to challenge Mormon expansion. The entry's removal from official history isn't just revisionism. It's evidence of the church's broader strategy to whitewash its violent origins. Grant Underwood puts it plainly, early Mormon histories aimed not to preserve an accurate record, but to promote faith and unity. The Millenarian World of Early Mormonism, p. 134. So, while modern portrayals of Joseph Smith depict a prophet of peace, the facts paint a very different picture. He was a man wielding both pen and sword, commanding a group whose mission was anything but holy. The erasure of this journal entry was a calculated move to hide just how far he was willing to go to protect his vision of Zion. Let that sink in. This omission raises critical questions. To what extent was Joseph Smith directly involved in the Danites' formation and activities? And how does this revisionism affect our understanding of early Mormon history? Far from a minor footnote, the Danites and their connection to Smith reflect the growing divide between the Saints and their Missouri neighbors, a divide that would erupt into violence later that year, with devastating consequences for both sides. Part 2. Tensions rise in Gallatin, Missouri. The Gallatin Election Day battle on August 6, 1838, was a flashpoint in the tensions between Mormon settlers and non-Mormon residents in Daviess County, Missouri. The event occurred during a local election, where arguments erupted over whether Mormons would be allowed to vote. Non-Mormon residents feared the growing political power of the Mormon community, suspecting that their block voting might sway the election outcomes and diminish the influence of long-standing settlers. The conflict began when William Penniston, a candidate for the state legislature, openly urged non-Mormon voters to prevent Mormons from casting their ballots, calling them horse thieves, liars, and counterfeiters. This incendiary rhetoric led to physical confrontations as non-Mormon settlers attempted to block Mormon men from entering the polling station. The dispute quickly escalated into a brawl, with both sides engaging in fistfights and improvised weapon use. This skirmish did not result in fatalities, but it significantly heightened tensions in the region. Following the battle, rumors spread that Mormons intended to retaliate, prompting non-Mormon settlers to discuss organizing militias against the perceived Mormon threat. The election battle also solidified the view among many Missourians that the Mormons were a threat to local governance and societal order, further alienating them from their neighbors. For the Mormons, this incident was emblematic of the prejudice and hostility they faced, reinforcing their perception of themselves as a persecuted people. The Gallatin conflict thus became both a catalyst and a symbol of the deeper divisions that would erupt into open warfare later that year. Part 3. Joseph takes on another wife. In 1838, Joseph Smith's second plural marriage to Lucinda Pendleton Morgan Harris marked a pivotal and controversial moment in the history of Mormon polygamy. This wasn't just any plural marriage, it was Joseph's first polyandrous marriage, where a woman was already married to another man, but sealed to Joseph Smith. This raises a critical question. Why would Joseph Smith marry another man's wife for spiritual reasons? Lucinda was married to George Washington Harris, a devout Mormon leader and supporter of Joseph Smith. But when Joseph Smith sealed Lucinda to himself, George was nowhere in the picture. This wasn't some simple marriage. It was a direct spiritual claim over a woman who was already married. Why would Smith do this? And more importantly, what did it mean for George Harris, a faithful member of the church, who now found himself spiritually disconnected from his own wife? Let's break this down. When a woman is sealed to a man in Mormon doctrine, she cannot be sealed to another. It's a one-way street, and only men can have multiple sealing relationships. By sealing Lucinda Pendleton to himself, Joseph Smith wasn't just creating a spiritual connection with her. He was robbing George Harris of his right to that eternal bond. The very essence of familial ties in Mormonism was taken from George forever. Now think about this. What does it mean to seal someone if they can never be sealed to anyone else ever again? The idea of sealing is to bind families together for eternity. But by sealing Lucinda to himself, Joseph Smith locked her into a relationship where she couldn't be sealed to George or anyone else for all eternity. For Joseph's many wives, this meant they were spiritually tied to him, and only him. There would be no other eternal bonds with other men. Joseph Smith wasn't just claiming dominion over a woman's earthly life. He was claiming an eternal right to her, and he did it at the expense of her legal husband. Part 4. Joseph lights a torch. The Mormon War in Missouri, also known as the 1838 Mormon War, was a pivotal and violent conflict that unfolded during the fall of 1838. Tensions between Mormons and non-Mormon residents of Missouri had been simmering for several years, with escalating confrontations, religious persecution, and political disagreements. By the summer of 1838, these tensions reached a boiling point, and open violence erupted. The Danites played a crucial role in the early stages of the conflict. They were tasked with enforcing discipline within the Mormon community, protecting Mormon interests, and dealing with those they saw as threats. The Danites were led by Joseph Smith, who, under the guise of protecting the Mormons, often used the group for more aggressive actions. On October 27, 1838, Joseph Smith led around 150 Danites on a mission to Diamond, a settlement in northern Missouri, with the goal of protecting the Mormons there from hostile non-Mormon forces. Smith claimed that the Mormons were under attack, but the Danites were also preparing for offensive actions. This show of force in Diamond was meant to defend Mormon settlers, but it also intimidated local residents and showcased the growing militarization of the Mormon community. At the same time, the Mormons began to make threats against local leaders they deemed hostile, including Judge Adam Black. Black was a prominent non-Mormon in the area and had been critical of the Mormons. Reports surfaced that Mormon leaders, including Smith and his followers, were threatening to take action against individuals suspected of being anti-Mormon or of collaborating with local militias. These reports were part of a larger narrative of Mormon invasion in the surrounding counties, with rumors and accusations circulating that the Mormons were attempting to seize land and establish their own political and religious authority. As the situation escalated, anti-Mormon militias formed and clashes became inevitable. The Mormon community, initially numbering in the thousands, was viewed by many Missourians as a dangerous and foreign entity, disrupting the social and political order of the state. On August 13, 1838, the Davis County judges, acting on complaints from local non-Mormon residents, issued writs for the arrest of Joseph Smith and Lyman White. The writs were linked to the growing unrest and several confrontations between Mormons and non-Mormon citizens. At this point, the Mormon leadership was accused of inciting violence and unrest, particularly in the wake of a series of skirmishes in the region. The writs were issued during a period of heightened conflict. The Mormon community was facing increasing violence in retaliation for attacks, and Joseph Smith's leadership was under intense scrutiny. In particular, Smith's role in the formation of the Danites became a key point of contention. The Danites had been involved in various confrontations with non-Mormon citizens, including threats and violent encounters. These writs were part of the legal actions being taken to curb the growing violence and instability in the region. The arrest orders further inflamed the tensions between the Mormon community and local residents. Joseph Smith and Lyman White were seen as two of the main figures in organizing and directing the Mormon defense, and the authorities were eager to bring them to justice in response to the escalating violence. The issuing of the writs would set off a chain of events that would further destabilize the situation in Missouri. Shortly thereafter, mobs and militia groups began to escalate their harassment of Mormons, and Joseph Smith and other Mormon leaders would soon be on the run, eventually being forced into temporary exile in other parts of the state. The Missouri militia would take further military action against the Mormons in the following months, leading to the infamous extermination order issued by Governor Lilburn W. Boggs in October 1838, which called for the Mormons to be driven from the state. Please watch for future videos, and thank you so kindly for watching. This is the Ex-Mormon Informant signing off for the day.